Olá, boa noite. O Roda Viva começa agora para todo o Brasil pela TV Cultura e suas emissoras afiliadas. Também é possível assistir a este e outros programas de qualquer lugar do mundo e a qualquer tempo por meio das principais plataformas digitais e do app Cultura Play. No momento em que as negociações para pôr fim à guerra da Ucrânia transcorrem sem nenhuma garantia de sucesso e com a Rússia insistindo em termos como a desmilitarização do país e a concessão de territórios, nós recebemos hoje uma das mais atuantes vozes da sociedade civil ucraniana. Na linha de frente da denúncia de crimes de guerra cometidos pela Rússia contra o seu país, desde a primeira fase do conflito, iniciada em 2014, ela foi agraciada com o Prêmio Nobel da Paz em 2022, ano em que começou a invasão total da Ucrânia pelas tropas de Vladimir Putin. Ela tem se mostrado cautelosa quanto ao sucesso nas tratativas intermediadas pelo presidente dos Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, de pôr fim ao conflito. Para falar sobre o momento atual de uma das mais complexas guerras em curso no mundo hoje, nós recebemos a advogada ucraniana e líder da ONG Centro pelas Liberdades Civis, Oleksandra Matviichuk.
Oleksandra Matviichuk nasceu em 8 de outubro de 1983 em Boiarka, na Ucrânia. É formada em Direito pela Universidade Nacional Taras Shevchenko, de Kiev, e é fundadora e diretora da Organização de Direitos Humanos Centro para as Liberdades Civis, que recebeu o Prêmio Nobel da Paz de 2022. No mesmo ano, foi laureada com o Right Livelihood Award por seu trabalho com as instituições democráticas ucranianas e pela busca de responsabilização por crimes de guerra. Também foi homenageada como uma das 100 mulheres mais importantes do ano pela BBC de Londres. E em 2023 recebeu o título de doutora honoris causa da Universidade Católica de Lovaina, na Bélgica.
Para entrevistar a advogada Oleksandra Matviichuk, nós convidamos Luiz Hatz, subeditor de Internacional e colunista do Estadão, Camila Veras Mota, repórter da BBC News Brasil, Leila Sterenberg, jornalista, documentarista e senior fellow do Centro Brasileiro de Relações Internacionais, Daigo Oliva, editor da homepage da Folha de São Paulo, e Ian Boixá, jornalista do Canal Meio. Contamos ainda com os registros em charges do nosso Luciano Veronese. Boa noite, Oleksandra. Muito obrigada por estar aqui conosco e parabéns pelo seu trabalho. A gente está num programa de TV aberta e possivelmente uma boa parte da nossa audiência não conhece o seu trabalho, o que a ONG faz e qual é o seu papel na busca por responsabilização dos crimes de guerra cometidos no seu país. Queria que você desse um panorama de como você começou a sua carreira como advogada dos direitos humanos, ativista em prol da paz, e em que ponto você vê o conflito nesse momento.
When I was a child studying at school, I got acquaintance with dissidents. And suddenly I found myself in a circle of fantastic people. People who say what they think and do what they say. People who had the bravery to stood up their voice against the entire totalitarian Soviet machine. They were severely repressed, but they didn't give up. So being a child in a school, I was so inspiring by this example that I decided myself to study law, to continue this fight for freedom and for human dignity. When Russia first time invaded Ukraine, it was a specific time because just several months prior to it, millions of Ukrainians stood up their voice against pro-Russian, authoritarian and corrupt government. And they peacefully demonstrated just for a chance to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And when we got our chance, because authoritarian regime collapsed, in order to stop us on this way to the genuine democracy, Russia invaded. Russia occupied Crimea, part of the eastern regions of Ukraine, and 3 years ago extended this war to the large-scale invasion. In 2014, Ukraine was a neutral country. Neutrality was ingrained in our constitution. So Putin started this war not because he was afraid of NATO. Putin started this war because he was afraid of idea of freedom.
Sim. Leila, por favor.
Você então diz, Alexandra, e boa noite, antes de mais nada, que essa guerra não começou em 2022, e sim em 2014, que não é uma guerra entre dois países, é uma guerra entre dois sistemas, autocracia e democracia, e que é uma guerra que diz respeito ao mundo todo. Porque se a Rússia sair impune ao agredir e ocupar um país vizinho, desrespeitar o direito internacional, cometer milhares de crimes de guerra, o que mais ela pode fazer? E que recado ela passa para outros países que queiram fazer a mesma coisa? Mas como a chamada comunidade internacional pode intervir se o país mais poderoso do mundo, econômica e militarmente, os Estados Unidos, tem hoje um governo que promove a erosão da própria democracia, não acredita em cooperação e nem preza pelos direitos humanos?
Let me describe the general picture. I don't know how historians in future will call this historical period, but we happen to live in a very turbulent time. The world order, which is based on UN Charter and international law, is collapsing before our eyes. The work of Security Council is paralyzed, and now it's easy to predict that such fires like wars will emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe, because this international wiring is faulty and sparks are everywhere. And before, it was visible only for people in Sudan, in Myanmar, in Nicaragua, in Iran, in Venezuela, but now it's become visible for people in all countries of the world. So when we speak about Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, what the message Putin tried to convey to the world? Putin attempts to convince the entire world that democracy, freedom, human rights are fake values because they couldn't protect you during the war. Putin attempts to convince that country with a strong military potential and nuclear weapon can break the international UN Charter, can dictate its rules to entire international community, and even forcibly changed internationally recognized borders. And if Putin succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in different parts of the globe to do the same and to violate the very international principle: respect to territorial integrity, inviolability of state borders, respect of human rights and freedom. So it's not just a question for Ukraine. What Ukraine has to do in such circumstances is a question to international community: how to stop this horror, how to stop this Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. And I think, to provide a brief answer to your very deep question, that the red carpet is not working.
Luiz, por favor.
Boa noite, Alexandra. Eu gostaria de te perguntar, de um ponto de vista mais da população civil da Ucrânia, como essa guerra, principalmente a partir de 2022, afetou a vida normal das pessoas, né? Como as pessoas, enfim, tanto nas cidades grandes quanto nas menores, vão para a escola, fazem planos, tentam viver a vida em meio à agressão russa.
I'm still trying to find the proper words to describe what does it mean during the large-scale war. Because war is the most horrible thing which just can happen in a human life. To live during the large-scale war means that you live in total uncertainty. You can't plan not just your day, you can't plan your next several hours because you have no idea what will happen. To live during the large-scale war means that you live in constant fear for your beloved ones because there is no safe place in Ukraine where you can hide from Russian rockets, and Russia deliberately hit residential buildings, schools, churches, museums, and hospitals. Let me illustrate it with a story. This is a story of a family from Kiev, from my native city. When the large-scale war started, they moved to another city in deep rear just to save their daughter. But Russians hit the city as well, and their 4-year-old daughter died. So this is what's going on every day in Ukraine. This horror become a part of our daily life. The war is a lottery. When I go to bed, being in Kiev, I have no idea whether or not I will get up next morning.
Daigo, por favor.
Alexandra, boa noite. A senhora veio ao Brasil no ano passado, durante a época do G20, e numa entrevista à imprensa brasileira disse que gostaria de mostrar ao país as atrocidades cometidas pela Rússia. Eu queria saber se a senhora teve a oportunidade de contar isso para algum membro do governo brasileiro e qual a sua avaliação sobre a postura do governo Lula em relação à guerra da Ucrânia.
It's a general problem that we are losing human dimension of this war. And I see that governments, they focus on different issues like natural minerals, Russia's territorial claims, geopolitical interests, even on Putin's vision of our own history, but they don't speak about people. And I think that it's not okay, because this war has a very vivid human dimension. We have to find an answer to the complex questions. What will be with 20,000 illegally deported Ukrainian children to Russia who were separated with their families and supposed to be adopted by Russians who will bring them up as Russians? What will be with thousands and thousands illegally detained civilians, men and women, as well as prisoners of the war, subjected to horrible torture and sexual abuse daily? I personally interviewed hundreds of them. They told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were electrically shocked through their genitalia. Knowing these details, I have a clear understanding that part of these people have zero chance to be alive till the end of this war. Also, I want international community to discuss what will be with people under Russian occupation. We speak about millions of people who live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, their children, their beloved ones. Because Russian occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. So why I'm here in Brazil, I'm here to speak about human dimension, because without human dimension, we will never find a path to sustainable peace.
Qual que é a posição da senhora em relação à postura do governo brasileiro em relação à guerra da Ucrânia?
I strongly believe that the Brazilian government can do more. Brazil in a close communication with Russia, so they can use this as a tool how to push Russia to solve urgent humanitarian issues.
Camila, por favor.
A senhora fala bastante da dimensão humana da guerra, né? Do outro lado, a gente tem a dimensão geopolítica e diplomática que ganhou fôlego, ficou em evidência nas últimas semanas com as reuniões organizadas pelo presidente americano Donald Trump, com Putin no Alasca e com Zelensky, líderes europeus, em Washington. Nesse sentido, eu queria perguntar para a senhora, que é ganhadora do Nobel da Paz, o presidente Donald Trump está em uma campanha aberta pelo Prêmio Nobel, já disse, inclusive, se achar merecedor do prêmio algumas vezes. A senhora acha que ele merece ganhar o Nobel da Paz?
When President Trump told that he wanted to stop this war, he mentioned that he wanted to do it because he cared about people who died in this war. And I think it's a right intent to care about people who die. But being a president, to receive a Nobel Peace Prize, it means that he has to demonstrate strength and to achieve a sustainable and just peace, which is not an easy task, because Putin doesn't want peace. Putin wants to achieve his geopolitical goal. Putin started this war not because he wanted to occupy just another piece of Ukrainian land. He started this war because he wanted to occupy and destroy the whole country and move further. He sees my country as a bridge to Europe. He dreams about his legacy. He wants to forcibly restore Soviet Empire. And the problem is that even after 3 years of large-scale war and 11 years of war as such, he doesn't refuse from his goal, because human life is the cheapest resources for Russian state. Putin doesn't care how hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers have to be killed in order to achieve this goal. So this is a very difficult issue to make Putin stop. So I wish every international leaders who want to do it to succeed.
Ian, por favor.
Alexandra, a Ucrânia deveria ter tido eleições presidenciais em 2024 e eleições parlamentares em 2023 e ambas foram suspensas. Ao mesmo tempo, nesse período, jornalistas ucranianos que investigam o governo têm sido ameaçados, perseguidos e alguns até ameaçados de alistamento forçado para ir para o fronte. Mais recentemente, o presidente Volodymyr Zelensky tentou fechar 2 agências que combatem a corrupção no país. A Ucrânia vive hoje uma democracia plena, na sua opinião?
Let's be honest, we are not ideal democracy. Just 11 years ago, I mentioned on the beginning of our program, we lived under pro-Russian, authoritarian and corrupt government. And we have only 11 years to conduct democratic reforms. And to make democratic transition is difficult even during the peaceful time. We are in a time of the large-scale war. And we have to do 2 tasks parallel, to defend our country, our people, and our democratic choice, and to conduct democratic reforms. Because victory for us is to succeed in democratic transition of our country. So let me assure you that people in Ukraine, they respect freedom to election and freedom to vote very much. Because in 2004, millions of Ukrainians peacefully protested during the Orange Revolution when this right was stolen from people in Ukraine. And Russia tried to impose the pro-Russian candidate to be our president. So we proved that right for vote is very essential for us. And now we are in a situation when Ukrainian constitution prohibited to conduct election during the war, like a lot of other constitutions in the world, because there are a lot of practical issues how to make election happen, to be real elections, not just imitation like Russia has, when Putin killed even the main opponent, Navalny, in prison. And there were no even technical opposition candidate in their Russian so-called elections. So we have to solve the problems, how to provide the right of vote for more than 7.5 million of people who are now abroad because of the war, how to provide the right of vote for people who live under occupied territories. And the question also is how to find money for all this stuff, and how to secure the whole electoral process, and how to engage the most active part of Ukrainian society, I mean people who volunteering to join Ukraine army to defend our democratic choice. We can't exclude it from the process, but how to organize electoral process in the trenches. So that is why this taboo in constitution have a lot of practical meaning, and this is a task which we have to solve in future. And like, based on your question, we are not ideal democracy. We have a lot of things to be done, but we are on the right way. Mm-hmm. And this way was underlined by Revolution of Dignity. And this way, it wasn't given us as a gift. During the Revolution of Dignity, pro-Russian regime killed more than 100 peaceful protesters just in the center of square. Students, men, women, different age, different professions, people who just peacefully demonstrate, and they killed them because they want to physically liquidate this peaceful protest. So we are on our way, and let me demonstrate it with one recent example. Just several weeks ago, Ukrainian parliament passed a law which put into doubt some anti-corruptional bodies' independence. How people in Ukraine reacted? People in Ukraine started mass protest, and Ukrainian parliament registered a new draft of law and return everything back. So this is once again demonstrate that strength of Ukraine is in people, in local democracy, in decentralization, in this belief that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that our efforts matters. So it was a sign of strength of Ukrainian society once again.
Com isso, então, a gente encerra o nosso primeiro bloco do Roda Viva, vai para um breve intervalo e volta já já com a líder, ativista e advogada ucraniana, Oleksandra Matviichuk.
Inovação que conecta. Bradesco.
O Roda Viva está de volta, hoje recebendo a advogada ucraniana e vencedora do Prêmio Nobel da Paz, Oleksandra Matviichuk. Queria continuar falando sobre esse tema de política interna da Ucrânia, porque a gente vem num conflito de 3 anos e meio com um líder que no começo não parecia o líder mais talhado para enfrentar uma situação de guerra, porque era um político de fora do establishment que tinha assumido a presidência da Ucrânia, que é o Volodymyr Zelensky. Ele ganhou notoriedade internacional ao defender a Ucrânia, mas eu imagino que o prolongamento do conflito possa estar minando a sua popularidade e a sua legitimidade. Em que momento a senhora vê a liderança do Zelensky para conduzir, inclusive, essas tratativas de paz?
First, let me assure you, because I work with people affected by this war directly, that people in Ukraine dream about peace. We all dream about peace. We all want to live without fear of violence and have a long-term perspective. But the problem is that peace doesn't come when a country which was invaded by the more bigger neighbor stop resisting, because it will be not a peace but occupation. And occupation is the same horror, but just in another form. So returning to your question about President Zelensky, he won presidential election in 2019 with a huge rating. The vast majority of Ukrainian population trusts him. And he, in first year of large-scale war, also demonstrated himself as a very brave person. I, as a human rights lawyer, I often criticize government. We always find for what we can criticize them, because there is no ideal government, but I must recognize that he behaved very brave. I was in Kiev when Russian troops tried to circle my city. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continued our work on the ground. And it was a very dangerous time, because we have no idea what will happen tomorrow. Probably Russian soldiers will appear in the street of our city. And I also witnessed how international organizations evacuated their personnel. They left us alone.
Sí.
And it was that moment when President Zelensky made this famous video and told, I'm also here. And when international partners proposed him to evacuate, he told, I don't need evacuation, I need weapons. And this was a very bright moment, which demonstrates spirit. And I think that this is a transformation which happened not just with President Zelensky, but with every single individual in Ukraine. Because when your freedom is denied, it's become powerfully break out through every concrete individuals. It was in a moment when millions of Ukrainians told, we don't care that Russia is such enormous opposing power. We don't care that Russia has veto power in UN, nuclear weapons, strong military potential, 140 million of population, oil and gas. We will fight for our freedom and for our dignity, because we are freedom-loving people.
Sim, está aberto. Leila?
Existe mandado de prisão do Tribunal Penal Internacional contra o presidente russo Vladimir Putin por crimes de guerra contra a humanidade, genocídio, mas a Rússia nunca ratificou o Estatuto de Roma, tampouco os Estados Unidos reconhecem o TPI, tanto que Putin foi tranquilamente ao Alasca encontrar Donald Trump. O Tribunal Penal Internacional se tornou inócuo e, se isso aconteceu, qual seria a perspectiva de uma punição para Vladimir Putin? Criar talvez um tribunal ad hoc, como os que foram montados nos anos 90 para os crimes da antiga Iugoslávia e Ruanda, mas a criação de uma corte assim teria que passar pelo Conselho de Segurança das Nações Unidas. E a Rússia é membro permanente do Conselho de Segurança, então, obviamente, vetaria qualquer resolução nesse sentido. Daí, à luz do direito internacional, qual é a saída?
When I saw Putin on the red carpet, I told to myself, I would prefer to see him in The Hague. Because in May 2023, International Criminal Court issued arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. And now, when I say that, every political leader who's shaking hand with Putin have to be aware that he or she is shaking hands with the biggest child kidnapper in the world. It's not metaphor. I just to make reference to this legal indictment of the International Criminal Court, because Putin was accused in the illegal deportation, say simply trafficking, of dozens of thousands of Ukrainian children to Russia, which is a horrible crime, because the parts of these children, their parents were killed by Russians, but they still have families who want to return them home. Part of these children, their parents were arrested by Russians. They are in Russian prisons, but regardless of this, Russians start the process of forcible adoption. And the problem is that Russian legislation provides ability for Russian families to change the name of child, the date of birth, the place of birth. It means that when we speak about small children, like 1 or 2 year old, they will lose their identity. And when their parents will be free and released from Russian jails, their parents will not find them. So it's a huge crime. And I'm very glad that International Criminal Court issued this arrest warrant. I know this is just the beginning of a long marathon, but still it has already made the world smaller for Putin. Last year, Brazil organized a huge international event. It was G20 summit, and Putin afraid to come to Brazil because Brazil is democracy, and Brazil is a party of International Criminal Court and has the obligation to arrest Putin if he decided to appear in this territory. And according to the question of special tribunal, we faced accountability gap, and that's why we need a new international court. The problem is that International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction to prosecute Putin and top political leadership and high military command of the Russian state for the crime of aggression. But all atrocities which we are documenting, it's result of their leadership decision to start this bloody war. And they have to be punished for the crime against peace. And this is even more than that, because if we want to prevent wars in the future, we have to punish states and their leaders who start such wars in present. It sounds like a common sense, but there is no international court which can fulfill this. That is why, for 3 years, we are promoting the idea of creation of special tribunal on aggression. And I'm glad to announce that, okay, not on UN level, but in a frame of other international regional organization, Council of Europe, it was made a historical decision to start such special tribunal. And what is important, that this tribunal will be open to any country to join. So I hope that sooner or later, Brazil will join to special tribunal on aggression, and to not to be neutral when we see this oppression.
Sim. Ian.
Alexandra, aqui. Grupos que têm origem na extrema-direita, como o Centúria, o Azov, sacrificaram profundamente nesses 3 anos de guerra e, por conta disso, ganharam muito poder e influência na Ucrânia. Esses grupos já disseram e demonstraram que são absolutamente contra a cessão de territórios para a Rússia para se terminar essa guerra. Se de fato houver um acordo que vai ceder território para a Rússia, como é que a senhora acha que esses grupos vão se portar? há um temor de que haja uma guerra civil na Ucrânia após o fim da guerra com a Rússia?
Thank you for this question. During all these years, Russia tried to present Ukraine as a far-right radicals. This is a methodology how to justify this war of aggression and how to justify this intentional torture, rape, and murder which Russia imposed widely in occupied territories. But when we look to the reality, we will see that after Revolution of Dignity, when we have election in 2014, and when we have presidential and parliamentary election in 2019, Ukrainians didn't provide their vote for far-right parties. We have 0 far-right parties in parliament. So it's not the case for Ukraine. The case for Ukraine is another thing. As I told that according to social survey and according to my personal experience, people dream about peace. But we want peace, not some temporal pause which Russia will use to retreat, to regroup, and to go further. Because in 2014, when Russia occupied Crimea and part of eastern regions, Ukraine has a 0 chance to release people on these territories. And Ukraine approved and signed so-called peace agreement with Russia, Minsk agreement. And how Russia used these 8 years of so-called peace? Russia transferred Crimea to the powerful military base and increased military presence in the eastern regions of Ukraine which they occupied. To make this as a platform for a new attack, Russia prepared the economy for the next wave of sanctions. Russia produced artillery shells. Russia retreat, regroup, and start large-scale war. So this is an issue that we are aware that for current moment, Ukraine has no potential to release this territory by military way, but we want ceasefire and we want security guarantee that tomorrow Russia will not violate the ceasefire and will not attack us again.
Eu queria saber como você acha que esses grupos vão reagir se houver de fato um acordo que inclua a cessão de territórios para a Rússia, porque o Azov em especial, mas a Centúria também, ganharam muito poder, atuam de forma muito independente, autônoma na Ucrânia, têm muitas armas. Como a senhora acha que esses grupos vão reagir a um acordo que inclua a cessão de territórios?
In 2014, when Russia attacked Ukraine, Ukraine was totally unprepared for this. And even the mobilization to join the Ukrainian army was delayed for weeks and weeks. And that's why these volunteer battalions appeared in 2014, which has some autonomy, which try to get weapons and try to fight with Russians. But then in 2015 and 2016, all these volunteer battalions were liquidated. There is no such a group which operated autonomously. They're all the part of Ukraine armed forces. They are centralized and they fulfill the orders. So the question is, which worried me more, how people in Ukraine will perceive this different variants of peace negotiation, because we look to this from the different prism. Let me explain you. When international community discuss this Russia's territorial claim, and some of them push Ukraine to give up part of territories to satisfy Putin's imperialist appetites, they think that it's just territories. But we are worried not about territories. Mm-hmm. We are fighting for people who live on these territories, because it's not abstract territories. Mm-hmm. It's our families, it's our relatives, it's our friends, it's our colleagues, it's people who live there. The problem is that Russia imposed terror against civilians in occupied territories because they have to save control. They physically exterminate active local people there, like journalists, mayors, children writers, priests, musicians, any active people of community. So the problem is that we have no moral right to leave Ukrainian people alone for torture and death under Russian occupation.
Daigo. Pois não.
Desculpe-me. Alexandra, você citou há pouco que no começo da guerra o presidente Zelensky deu alguns exemplos de coragem. Mas em fevereiro desse ano aconteceu um episódio muito simbólico que foi muito ruim para a imagem dele. Ele foi até a Casa Branca se encontrar com Donald Trump e J.D. Vance, o vice-americano, e a percepção geral é que ele foi humilhado em frente à imprensa. Eu tenho certeza de que a senhora pode explicar as razões e os dobramentos políticos desse episódio, mas eu gostaria de saber como a senhora se sentiu como ucraniana, qual foi a sua reação e a reação geral da sociedade ucraniana em relação a esse episódio.
I look to this through the prism of law, because it was a very interesting debate. Do you remember that President Trump told that you have no card? But the law is on our side. According to international law, there is no justification for unprovoked aggression. According to international law, aggressor has to be punished. According to international law, aggressor has to pay for all losses and destructions. So what we hear in the White House, that law, it's not the cards. And this is much more than just about Ukraine. It's about a new world order which can be created. The world order where just strongest countries will dictate their rule and push other countries to fulfill it. And this is not the world which is safe for people to live in, because the world of strongest, it's always world of wars and mass violence.
Alexandra, eu queria seguir um pouco na pergunta do Daigo. Você estava falando de que o mundo pode ir para uma nova ordem. A gente vê ali o Trump praticamente querendo fazer uma nova conferência de alta, né, entre algumas aspas, meio que propondo dividir ali a Ucrânia sem consultar os ucranianos, sem consultar os europeus. Você acha que qual a chance disso ocorrer de fato? A probabilidade de que o Trump possa implementar essa nova ordem dividindo a Ucrânia?
I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm not a person who can predict future. But what I know about future, that future is not just unclear, it's also not pre-written. And I believe that we as honest people have to try hard to use the chance to build the future which we want. And that is why I'm being a human rights lawyer. I continue to document war crimes, to provide a chance for justice for enormous amount of people affected by this Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, even in circumstances when the law doesn't work. I believe that is temporary, and I feel an obligation to do everything which I can to overcome this period and to make the law work. And if everyone will behave in such a way, we will succeed.
Camila.
Ainda dentro da seara sobre as negociações, possíveis negociações de um cessar-fogo e de um acordo de paz, né? A senhora sempre falou muito sobre a necessidade de haver garantias de segurança sólidas e reais dentro de uma discussão de um acordo de paz. Esse assunto foi muito debatido no encontro de Trump com os líderes europeus, né? O chanceler alemão falou sobre isso, o presidente francês falou sobre isso. Eu queria que você desse exemplos práticos do que você considera seu ideal nesse sentido, né? Das garantias de segurança. A gente está falando da Ucrânia entrar na OTAN, a gente está falando de soldados europeus estarem no território ucraniano. O que isso significa para você?
Let me explain why we need it urgently. Because Ukraine has a third nuclear arsenal in the world, and Ukraine gave up of the third nuclear arsenal in a state of security guarantees. And we had so-called Budapest Memorandum signed by Russia, by United States, by Great Britain, and then later by France and China joined to provide us security if someone attacks us. So now we have a joke in Ukraine. So if you exchange your weapon for security guarantees on paper, one guarantor will occupy your territories, another guarantor will start to talk about your natural minerals. So that's why we need something really essential, not just paper. We don't want to repeat this story. And what can be? I'm not military expert. That's why I can just tell very abstract formulation that we need measures of prevention and reactions from different countries, real measures which make Putin understand that it's impossible for him to achieve his goal to occupy and destroy the whole country, that in other way, without such measures, he will just postpone this goal for several months or for several years.
Hoje em dia, a presença da Ucrânia na OTAN é majoritária dentro da sociedade ucraniana? Ela tem um apoio majoritário da sociedade?
Sure. According to social survey, Ukrainian society approved the path to NATO, which is a huge difference between, for example, 2014. Once again, in 2014, Ukraine was a neutral country. Ukrainian people don't want to join NATO, but Russia attacked us, and now for people in Ukraine, they see that it's a way how to provide them human security, because it's very difficult to live in constant fear for your beloved ones.
Leila?
Pois é, em russo existem duas palavras para russo. É Rossianin, que é quem tem cidadania russa, e Ruski, que é quem é russo étnico. Parece uma sutileza linguística, mas eu acho que ajuda a explicar um pouco a obsessão aparente que muitos russos, entre eles Vladimir Putin, têm pela Ucrânia como pertencente a essa grande identidade russa. Eu me pergunto como se sentem os ucranianos que nasceram e cresceram falando russo, como é o caso do próprio presidente Volodymyr Zelensky.
For sure, a lot of Ukrainians who was born in Soviet Union, like me, speak Russian's language, because we was a part of Soviet Empire and Ukrainian language was persecuted and banned. My personal story is a bright example. My first language was Russian, and I always thought that I was born in Russian-speaking families. But in school, when I started to teach the Ukrainian history, and it was possible because Soviet Union collapsed and we restored our independence and can teach Ukrainian history, I suddenly understood that my language was persecuted for centuries in Russian Empire, then in Soviet Union. And I suddenly realized that my language was stolen from me because the first language of my father was Ukrainian. But in Soviet Union, if you want to make career, and he is a doctor, the whole education in school, in university was only in Russian. And even more, if you continue to speak your native language, you will be treated like secondary person. My father is not fighter. It's not necessity for everyone to be fighters. He just doesn't want to be secondary, so he switched to Russians. So my story is a bright illustration why we still have a lot of people who speak Russians, because we was a part of Russian Empire. It's a legacy. But when you look to the Ukrainian army in 2014, who joined to Ukrainian army, it were mostly Russian-speaking people, because people can speak Russian language, but it doesn't mean that they feel themselves Russians. They are Ukrainians.
Ok, com isso então a gente encerra mais um bloco do Roda Viva, vai para outro rápido intervalo e voltamos já já com a entrevista da Prêmio Nobel da Paz, Oleksandra Matviichuk.
Inovação que conecta. Bradesco.
Estamos de volta com o Roda Viva, hoje recebendo a advogada ucraniana Oleksandra Matviichuk. A gente vive uma perspectiva sombria de ter dois conflitos massivos em curso no mundo. concomitantemente há bastante tempo. E nos últimos tempos, as atenções do mundo parecem ter se voltado prioritariamente para a faixa de Gaza, pelas cenas de horror que se vê lá e de violações constantes aos direitos humanos. A gente vive uma situação bizarra em que um conflito sangrento parece tirar os olhos do mundo de outro igualmente nefasto, sangrento.
Yes, unfortunately, it's sad truth that Ukraine is not just one hotspot in the earth. There are a lot of other wars which is going on. The terrible crimes are going on in Gaza. Also, the war in Sudan is going on for 23 years. And the horrible things which are happening there in Sudan is not more than news. You can't find information about Sudan in the front page. And this is very sad reality because we don't solve the conflicts. We just turn our attention to another one. So I think that our strategy has to be not to compete for attention, because if we will compete for attention, we will all fail. We have to unite our efforts and to push international community to solve these conflicts.
Sim. Camila, por favor.
Alexandra, você recentemente lançou com uma colega um livro com vários relatos de mulheres ucranianas, né, sobre a vivência delas na guerra. E eu acho que o trabalho da também ganhadora do Nobel de Literatura, a Svetlana Alexievich, sobre a guerra não tem rosto de mulher, trouxe para a gente essa perspectiva nova sobre o feminino na guerra. Eu queria pedir para você falar um pouco sobre isso, sobre a perspectiva do feminino na guerra da Ucrânia. Eu sei que você, inclusive, já perdeu algumas amigas, né, no conflito.
We have in our database more than 89,000 episodes of war crimes, which is a huge amount for sure. And among these episodes, there are a lot of crimes against women and children. But what I know, being in Ukraine, from my own experience, that women in this Russian war of aggression against Ukraine is not just victims. Ukrainian women are fighters. Ukrainian women voluntarily joined to Ukraine armed forces. We have more than 70,000 Ukrainian women who joined it. Among them, my friend, Andriana Susak. When the full-scale war started, he left her 6-year-old child and said to me, I have to fight for my son's peaceful and democratic future. Ukrainian women document war crimes, like my beloved friend, Ukrainian writer Victoria Melina, who was killed by Russian missile when Russian missile hit the cafe where she had a dinner together with Colombian writer. Ukrainian women take political decisions. Ukrainian women coordinate civil initiative. Ukrainian women are in the far front of this battle for freedom and democracy because bravery has no gender. And this is a bright illustration of what this war is about. Because in authoritarian countries, women perform only a assigned role for them in family and society. And this is a basis for authoritarian regime, because how people treat each other is always reflect a society idea what government is doing towards its own people. And that is why in Iran, women can be detained and raped for so-called inappropriate clothing. In Afghanistan, women are prohibited to study in universities and schools. In Russia, domestic violence was decriminalized because it's once again just a projection what the government is doing towards its own people. And that is why in this war with Russia, we Ukrainian women, we are fighting for our daughters. We want that our daughters will never face a situation that they have to prove someone that they are also human beings and have all human rights and freedoms.
Luiz.
Alexandra, o Putin já declarou que considera o fim da União Soviética a pior catástrofe geopolítica do século XX. Mas a gente vê ali um padrão de um apoio russo a minorias russas ali em ex-repúblicas soviéticas, que já aconteceu na Geórgia, aconteceu na Ucrânia, pode acontecer na Moldávia também. A minha pergunta para você é, você vê isso indo na Moldávia e também para as repúblicas do Báltico, ali, por exemplo, minorias russas na Estônia sendo apoiadas pelo Putin, de olho em uma possível intervenção?
There are huge differences between Russian-speaking people and people who support Putin. Taking Ukraine as example, I just mentioned before that in 2014, when Russia occupied eastern regions, the vast majority of people who voluntarily joined Ukraine armed forces was Russian-speaking Ukrainian from the eastern regions, which is very naturally. They just defend their homes, which Russia come to occupy. And Russia uses Russian-speaking narrative just as justification, because if we look to the reality, it's Russia who killed the vast majority of Russian-speaking Ukrainian in Ukraine in this war, which is a horror and tragedy. And also another narrative which Russia used. Russia pretend to be a very religious country. But when we look in what Russia is doing in occupied territories, it's systematic and large-scale religious persecutions. We saw that Russia cut the crosses from evangelical churches, that Russia detained and killed priests there. Just one story, a story of Stepan Podolchak, a priest from village Kalanchak in Kherson region, which is under occupation. He was captured in his house by Russians who came, took him barefooted with a bag under his hat, and they break everything in his home. After 2 days, Russians told to the wife of the father, Stepan Podolchak, that he died. Russians tortured this priest to death because before he several times refused to transfer his church to Russian church. He told, I can't break my oath in my congregation. So this is another huge difference between what Russia tried to present and what Russia is doing.
Mas você vê esse desejo do Putin de usar esse modus operandi também na Moldávia e no Báltico?
It's very widespread modus operandi, unfortunately, and I know that Putin will stop only when he will be stopped.
Daigo.
Alexandra, parte do trabalho do Centro para as Liberdades Civis é coletar depoimentos, testemunhos dos crimes de guerra das pessoas nos locais onde a guerra está acontecendo. Eu queria entender melhor como é que vocês fazem para proteger não só os colaboradores do centro, mas também as fontes, as pessoas, principalmente nos locais onde hoje é controlada pela Rússia. Como é que vocês fazem para proteger essas pessoas que colaboram com o centro?
It's a very responsible task for us, and that's why we use different sources of information. We analyze open data with further verification. There are a lot of information in the internet, in social network, which Russian soldiers just show to the public. We gather testimonies of victims and witnesses of war crimes who left these territories, so they are now in safety. We try to do our best using very strict security protocols to communicate with people under occupation, because they live in danger. You can be tortured to death only because in your phone, Russian security service find Ukrainian textbook. Just for this, you can be tortured to death. So we understand responsibility, what the hell is awaited for people if they will tell us about Russian war crimes.
Leila.
Alexandra, uma reportagem recente da revista britânica Economist descrevia o verão em Moscou, uma cidade limpa, florida, parecendo que o país não está em guerra, e contribui para um certo clima de normalidade o fato de que muitos soldados são pessoas que são pagas, né? Moram em províncias distantes, mais pobres, em vez de haver um recrutamento de jovens na capital. E a matéria, naturalmente, fala também de muita repressão, né? A gente já falou aqui da máquina de propaganda russa, existe uma repressão à liberdade de expressão. A gente sabe que existe gente que é contrária ao governo, tanto é que no funeral do Alexei Navalny havia milhares de pessoas. Você citou os seus amigos que trabalham com direitos humanos, as jornalistas, já entrevistei alguns dentro da Rússia ou fora da Rússia, fazendo um esforço muito grande para informar sobre o que acontece lá. mas na sua perspectiva, a maioria dos russos faz vista grossa para um governo cada vez mais imperial, beligerante, autocrático, que faz tortura nas prisões, em troca de uma suposta reconquista de grandeza que, em boa medida, é idealizada?
First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to honest Russian citizens who, in such unbelievable pressure, to call the spade, trying to fight for truth and to help us in this bloody war, which was started by their government. They're very courageous people, and I know about persecutions which they faced. I was shocked when I got information about very talented young Russian musician who was jailed because he publicly was against the war. And the war called in Russia special military operation, so you can be jailed only because you call that. It's not operation in the war. And he died in prison. He started hunger strike and he died because of this. So it's horrible situation, and I'm very grateful that being a minority, being against the public opinion, these people exist. It's important to acknowledge. And also, what is important that Putin governed his country not just with repression and censorship, but with a special social contract, which is based on Russian glory. The problem is that majority of Russians still see their glory in forcible restoration of Russian empire. And problem is that in every authoritarian country, people started to deprive of their agency. They start to say, we are ordinary people, the government knows better what has to be done. If Putin started this war, he knows why he is doing this. So they start to voluntarily deprive of their responsibility and transferred not as a citizens, but to the object to be controlled. And that's why Russia has a huge population, but very less citizens, because citizens is not just people with passport. Citizens, it's people with responsibility.
Yeah.
Alexandra, o governo ucraniano tem explorado as fragilidades econômicas da América do Sul para recrutar mercenários para lutar no fronte ucraniano. Milhares de colombianos estão, nesse momento, lutando e morrendo na Ucrânia. E, nesse momento, a partir desse ano, a Ucrânia iniciou uma campanha bastante ativa para recrutar brasileiros para irem para a Ucrânia com promessas de salários de até $4.000. Muitos estão indo para lá. A senhora, como ativista dos direitos humanos, como a senhora classifica essa estratégia do governo ucraniano?
I mostly rely on other form of solidarity of ordinary people. I'm not military. I can't even predict if it can have influence to the military battlefield or not. What I know from my own experience, that we being far from each other, I mean Ukraine and Brazil, Ukraine and Colombia, we have a lot of common because we are fighting for freedom, which has no limitation in national borders. And I know that only spread of freedom make our world safer. And when I come here to Brazil, I just had public lecture. I faced with a very warm welcome from the audience. Because...
Mas a senhora não reconhece que essas pessoas estão indo lutar por dinheiro? Por conta de uma realidade econômica nesse continente, que $4.000 é bastante dinheiro?
I think that money means a lot, but there are a lot of people who will not die for money. And when I saw the soldiers who joined International Legion, and this is the official part of Ukrainian army, during the interview they provide to Ukrainian media, they told that the main intent for them to come was not money, what's their willingness to help, because they see injustice and they want to be useful. They can't be indifferent in such situation.
Qual é o papel da imprensa hoje na Ucrânia? É possível ainda manter um ecossistema de mídia, de imprensa atuando, mesmo com todas as limitações e todas as baixas provocadas pela guerra?
We have a lot of independent media, and government is not controlled media field. We have a problem. For example, we have this so-called national marathon. It was created when the large-scale war started, when several broadcasting united just to provide the same content. And in the beginning of the war, it was very rational because it was a chaos. And people need to be instructed, even where they can find medicine, what the train schedule is, and so on and so forth. But now I think after the 3 years of war, we have to rethink this decision. But still, there are a lot of alternative news media, I mean independent media, who are not belonging to this national marathon. And Ukraine take with a huge, as a huge value freedom of speech, because how you see the world, it's define your decisions and your behavior, and that is why the core of our democracy is freedom of speech.
Temos espaço para mais uma pergunta. Quem vai? Camila.
Alexandra, posso voltar um pouco na questão do posicionamento do governo brasileiro, né, em relação à guerra na Ucrânia. O presidente Lula já se colocou algumas vezes como um possível mediador do conflito, já sugeriu, inclusive, que o Brasil, junto com outros países, fizessem ali um meio de campo para tentar fechar um acordo entre os dois lados. E ele também já falou mais de uma vez que a responsabilidade pelo fato do conflito ainda estar acontecendo é dos dois lados, porque Rússia e Ucrânia não querem parar de guerrear. Eu queria saber o que você acha dessa visão sobre a guerra.
I think that we have to look to situations through the law prisma, not through Russian prisma, not through Ukrainian prisma, but from the prisma of international humanitarian law. And according to international humanitarian law, there is no the same sides. There is no same responsibility. There is aggressor and there is victim of aggression. And I think that only international law is the best optics to analyze the situation, because the law make our relationship between people and between countries more safe, more predictable, more inclusive, more fair.
Com isso, então, a gente faz o nosso último intervalo e volta já já para o encerramento desse importante Roda Viva sobre a guerra na Ucrânia.
Inovação que conecta. Bradesco.
Estamos de volta para o nosso último bloco com a advogada ucraniana Oleksandra Matviichuk. Queria abordar agora uma perspectiva pessoal desse conflito, porque você disse há pouco que não é uma militar, mas de certa maneira você está no fronte ao longo de todos esses anos de duração de um conflito, desde lá de trás da primeira invasão. Imagino que isso deva ter um custo pessoal muito grande em termos de quanto você consegue dedicar de tempo à sua família, em termos de saúde mental, de segurança, porque você deve ser ameaçada o tempo inteiro, deve ter que andar com uma segurança reforçada. Eu queria que você relatasse aqui para o nosso espectador como é essa perspectiva e como você se preserva um pouco de toda essa violência.
For sure, it's not easy to be a human rights lawyer in the war when you have no legal tools how to stop Russian atrocities. In 2022, UN Court of Justice issued preliminary intermediate decision and obliged Russia to immediately withdraw their troops from Ukraine. And Russia ignored even the decision of UN Court of Justice. So what I can use as a human rights lawyer to save people from the torture and death? Nothing. So it's very frustrating. But I also feel the huge responsibility. Let me illustrate it with a concrete example. We have a questionnaire when we make testimonies from people who survived Russian captivity. And there is a question, did you apply to international organization or to national legal enforcement bodies? And some part of people very confidently answered no. And when I asked why, they told, because we don't believe that it will be possible that our perpetrators will be arrested and jailed. So we don't want to waste our time. And then I ask, but you come to me and you tell your story to me, for what? And suddenly I understood that even those people who say that they have no hope, they still have it. They still have a tiny hope that if it will be possible, they want their story to be recorded, they want their story to be heard, and it's a huge responsibility. You have this dozens of thousands of stories which people didn't share with their beloved ones. And you know that people affected by this war, people who went through the hell, they need to restore not just their broken lives, broken families, broken visions of the future, but also the broken belief that justice is possible.
Mas mesmo nessa resposta, você deu uma resposta global, uma resposta sobre a população, sobre a vida dos cidadãos. Queria ouvir um pouquinho sobre a Alexandra. Você anda com segurança? Você consegue fazer algum tipo de terapia? Tem alguma fé que te ampare nesse seu trabalho? Quanto tempo você dedica à sua família? Você teme pela segurança da sua família?
I have no protection. There is no protection during the war. Being even Nobel Peace Prize laureate, I have no state protection because I'm not state officials. I don't represent state. I represent Ukrainian civil society. It's something different. That's why I have this opportunity to publicly criticize my government, which I want to keep with me, this opportunity. And what I know, I don't know how my personal story will end. Because once again, the war, it's a lottery. I lost a lot of friends in this war. Like Victoria Emeliana, which I mentioned during the previous round, my beloved friend, Ukrainian writer. And I don't know what will be with me, but I'm sure that despite how my personal story will end, freedom will prevail. Because Putin, he won't return us to the past, but future will come. It's inevitable.
Certo. Leila.
Você diria que existe uma identidade ucraniana que está sendo resgatada ou fortalecida desde 1991, mas sobretudo a partir de 2014 e sobretudo a partir de 2022? E se existe, você diria que isso acaba sendo, ironicamente, uma consequência positiva do conflito e acaba sendo um combustível para a autoestima dos ucranianos e para otimismo em relação ao futuro?
Please take my answer in the right way. There is nothing good in a war. Nothing good in a war. The war is the most horrible thing which just can happen in a human life. But these dramatic times provide us an opportunity to express the best in us, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to make a difficult but right choices, to take burden of responsibility, and to help each other. Because only when we help in each other, we are acutely aware what does it mean to be human.
Dai.
Alexandra, aqui. De todos os relatos que o Centro para as Liberdades Civis coletou durante esse período de guerra, teve alguma história que revelou algum aspecto positivo, otimista, que te surpreendeu, não só da sociedade ucraniana, mas também de indivíduos russos
I just mentioned that we closely cooperate with Russian human rights colleagues because we have dozens of thousands of people illegally detained in occupied territories and in Russia. And for us, the only way how help them to survive, it's our brave Russian human rights colleagues, and I'm very grateful. Probably I will not go into details because it will be dangerous for them, but let me tell you another thing. What surprised me? I interviewed a professor on philosophy after Russian captivity. He spent 700 days there. He told me how he was kept in solitary confinement, in a small cell in a basement without window, fresh air, light. He was severely tortured. In the dirty floor of his cell, the sewage was flows. And through the opening of the sewage, the rats crawling down. So he told me one detail which has no significance for evidence base, but it strikes me. He mentioned how he gave lectures on philosophy to these rats, just to hear a sound of human voice, because he was alone for months and months. And also he mentioned that all this experience, it's not a reason for him to treat himself as a victim, because the basis of our existence is dignity, not victimhood. And dignity is an action. And dignity provides us an opportunity to continue our fight even in unbearable conditions. And I want to answer to a question like this, because I see dignity in our brave Russian human rights colleagues. I see dignity in Ukrainians who are fighting for freedom and human dignity. And it's not the story of tragedy. It's a life-affirming story.
Camila.
Alexandra, queria te perguntar o outro lado da pergunta do Daigo, né? O Brasil fez um trabalho sistemático de documentação de violações dos direitos humanos durante a ditadura, que aqui durou de 64 a 85, em 2011. Ou seja, as violações, os crimes tinham sido cometidos já fazia tempo. E quando a gente ouvia os relatos das vítimas, ou quando a gente lê o relatório uma depois da outra, é difícil não se emocionar, mexe com você. São relatos de sofrimento, de tortura, de muita violência. Você vem fazendo isso há muito tempo, ouvindo os relatos dessas pessoas. Você acabou de compartilhar o relato do professor de filosofia. E aí eu queria fazer uma pergunta pessoal. Como que isso impacta o seu psicológico e dos seus colegas e como que vocês lidam com isso, com a natureza do trabalho de vocês? Eu já ouvi que tem algumas histórias, algumas vítimas que você não chega perto porque elas são mais delicadas ou mexem mais com você. Como que é isso?
For sure, I also pay my price because, first of all, I'm human beings and only then I'm professional lawyers. And we face with unprecedented amount of Russian war crimes, and we document not just violations of Geneva and Hague Conventions, we document human pain, and sometimes I have a feeling that this pain can burn me out, that it's something material, it's difficult. But let me share also one insight. When I was student of law faculty, I told to myself that I will never ever do something connected with criminal law because I have empathy to people and it will harm me. But when the war started, we was the first human rights organization who sent mobile groups to document war crimes in Crimea and in the eastern region. So what I reveal, I suddenly understood that something which I qualified as my vulnerability, this empathy to people, it's not vulnerability. It's my source of strength. Because when I tell the tale of these cases to so-called pragmatic politicians, they can't even hear these details. But we are doing this for 11 years. We're working with this pain on daily basis because we have empathy and we want to help people.
Ian?
Alexandra, o Ocidente vem prometendo apoio à Ucrânia desde a Revolução Laranja, no início desse século, né? Em 2014, John Kerry foi a Kiev, logo depois da Revolução. Em 2022, quando Zelensky deu sinais de que poderia tentar um acordo com a Rússia para parar a invasão, Boris Johnson foi a Kiev dizendo que ele continuasse a guerra porque a Inglaterra e os países do Ocidente iam apoiar a Ucrânia. E, ao final, a gente viu a OTAN testando a sua doutrina militar contra a doutrina russo-soviética nessa guerra, ao custo de centenas de milhares de vidas ucranianas. A senhora acredita que os ucranianos foram inocentes em acreditar nessas promessas?
I am very grateful for all assistance which we receive from international partners. And even more grateful for ordinary people in different countries which start to do extraordinary things when the large-scale war started. It's a good opportunity for me to say thank you because we survived because of you. Because ordinary people in different countries, they start to write about Ukraine. They welcome Ukrainian refugees. They crowdfunding for Ukrainian humanitarian initiative, and they do enormous work to help us. So I'm grateful. But what I'm confident, that future of Ukraine will be decided not in Moscow, not in Washington, not in another foreign state, but in Kiev.
Para a gente encerrar o programa, você tem dito que essa guerra é uma disputa entre autoritarismo e democracia. E a gente vê o autoritarismo ganhando escala no mundo, mesmo em regimes democráticos, líderes vão testando limites e impondo decisões de caráter autoritário. Isso está acontecendo nos Estados Unidos, isso está acontecendo em alguma medida em outros países. É um momento de desafio para a democracia? Você acredita que a democracia vai sobreviver ao século XXI?
I'm worried, frankly speaking, about democracy. I'm worried, frankly speaking, about freedom, because I know that 80% of people in the globe live in non-free or partially free society. I know that people who have a real right to vote for whom they want to vote, who have a real right to say what they want to say, a real right to love whom their heart tells them to love, and freely choose what God they want to pray, these people, just 20%, they are minority. And the problem is not just in fact that in authoritarian countries, the space for freedom is shrinking to the size of a prison cell. The problem is that in democracies, people stopped to fight for freedom. They start to take it for granted.
Yes.
They became consumers of democracy. They perceive freedom as a possibility to make choice between different cheeses in supermarket. But freedom is very fragile. We live in an era of turbulence. We have to step in from our zone of comfort for us and for our children.
Muito obrigada pela entrevista.
Obrigado.
É isso, nosso programa fica por aqui. Agradeço, além da Alexandra, também aos jornalistas que integraram a bancada de hoje, ao Luiz Hatz, a Camila Veras Mota, Leila Sterenberg, Daigo Oliva, Ian Boixá e ao meu parceiro, Luciano Veronese. Obrigada, sobretudo, a você pela sua audiência atenta, semana a semana, mesmo em temas bastante difíceis. Ao ser eleito em 2024, uma das bravatas feitas por Donald Trump foi a de que acabaria com a guerra na Ucrânia em 24 horas. Era impossível, como todos sabiam, inclusive o republicano. E ainda é incerto o sucesso de um acordo que signifique não só a rendição quase total aos desígnios de Vladimir Putin por parte da Ucrânia e a liderança americana nos esforços pela paz vai se mostrando bem mais complexa do que Trump bravateou. O que o trabalho de ativistas como a Alexandra tem feito ao longo de mais de 11 anos de duração total desse conflito no leste europeu é registrar crimes de guerra e cobrar do mundo uma solução que governos e organismos multilaterais têm se mostrado bastante incapazes de prover. Essa falta de mecanismos eficientes para pôr fim a conflitos é uma das principais causas da grande instabilidade geopolítica que marca esse momento do século XXI. E esse é um tema sobre o qual a gente tem se debruçado bastante, também aqui no Roda Viva. Voltamos na próxima segunda-feira, como sempre, às 10 da noite, e eu espero você. Até lá!
Inovação que conecta. Bradesco.